What's up, friends? It's a pleasure to be here with you again, just like every Friday. Today, we're going to talk about a character that many of you have requested in the comments, and you know his name has been making rounds in the news a few weeks back. His photo and his songs have been all over social media. Well, a few episodes ago, when I talked about diversity in one episode, we briefly mentioned this character because that episode was recorded just before the mess in the town was cleaned up by the government. Before we begin, I want to give a shout out to our armed forces who are working very hard. All good. Now, I'm going to tell you the truth about this character whom we nicknamed the Prophet, but I'll explain why we gave him this nickname later. We are going to debunk some of the things mentioned about him, and I will share some very interesting stories that I managed to investigate. Obviously, we'll also talk about what he did and, of course, how his resignation happened. So get comfortable, get your snacks ready, and enjoy this episode. Raul Alberto Carrasco Lechuga, better known as El Chore, had brothers nicknamed El Pato, who died of an illness, also El Chivo, and Ramon. Here I'll show you a photo of our friend Chore. He worked for the Chaparritos organization, and in the news about his resignation, it was mentioned that he was a great friend of them, which is the first lie we need to debunk. Absolutely and definitely, no. He wasn't their friend at all. In fact, they couldn't stand him, but we'll take on that later. Well, in the same news, it was said that he was a plaza boss. This is the second lie since Chore was no longer the plaza boss. They had already removed him from that position. Very well. To start with, Chore was the brother-in-law of Oso, Rey David Santiago Vargas, and Oso worked for El Licenciado. He was one of the main enforcers. So Chore was an Mongun and was under the orders of his brother-in-law, Oso. Chore was very young when he started in this environment, and being related to Oso made him one of Oso's most trusted people. He always liked to be all geared up and active. He and another guy nicknamed Chochias were quite the characters. They were the ones Oso trusted the most with missions, but at that time, they didn't hold a high rank or command. They were just the closest to Oso and led groups of 2 or 3 patrols each. Back then, honestly, there wasn't much to say about Chore because he practically didn't do anything outstanding. He didn't have any power or anything. It wasn't until around 2010 when he started to stand out because he was hungry to grow. That's when Oso started giving him more responsibilities and more guys under his command, but not too many. For example, once around the year 2012, an incident happened in El Dorado. A licenciado's secretary was parked at an OXXO, and a guy who worked for Ramon arrived at the same place. This guy was better known as Ramoncillo, the brother of El Caiman, who was a commander of El Macho Prieto. Anyway, the guy parked in such a way that he was blocking the secretary's car. The secretary got out and asked him if he could move, and the guy said no. So he told him to wait, and then the bodyguards that came with the secretary stepped in and started telling the guy to move, to give them a chance to get out. The guy told them to get lost, so a commotion started right there in the street. Ramoncillo's guys showed up, and so did the secretary's people, and they started arguing, pulling out their weapons, and it was chaos. The point is, you see, since the people from the secretary and those who came to support him were way more, they disarmed all of Ramoncillo's people. Once everything was sorted out, they returned the equipment, and that was it. It was over. Everyone went to sleep. But as always in that environment, you should never believe anything because it turns out they weren't satisfied. And like 2 hours after the event, they went to find the bodyguard of the secretary of Licenciado. His name was Carlos. They went to his house, and he was already asleep when he came out to see who they were. And when he realized they were the ones causing the problem, he tried to grab his tool, but they didn't let him. And that's when they shot him. He was severely injured and died minutes later while receiving medical attention. The attackers left, but Carlos's family had seen them. And they told the secretary of El Licenciado, so the next day the secretary talked with the ML and Sontom. And it was agreed there that they would catch the attackers. Right there, they called the Oso, and the ML gave the Oso the order to catch the guilt ones. Guess who they sent? Who the Oso sent with that mission? Obviously El Chore, of course, and so the Chore took 4 or 5 people, including Ramoncillo's son and 4 other youngsters. He took all of them to this place they called the business. They started to treat them there and had them kneeling against the wall. Then Ramoncillo arrived and saw how they had his son and his people, but he couldn't do anything because the Tigre wouldn't let him get close. To the one responsible for this whole conflict at the OXO, the one who didn't move. When asked to, he's the one who got the most beatings, and when they were slapping Ramoncillo's son, they kicked him and knocked him down. When they gathered him up, one of Oso's men felt something in the guy's pocket, and you won't believe what it was. Well, it turned out to be a pineapple, or rather, a grenade. And when they brought it to Oso, he grabbed the Chore and scolded him. Like, how could he not check them properly if those kids had been there for more than 4 hours? Ramoncillo's son could have detonated it right there. The Chore apologized and said he got carried away and was wearing a black helmet. Oso told him to take off the helmet, and when he did, Oso gave him a good knock on the head. And he began to resign many innocent people because to him, he could do whatever he wanted. Here I'm going to tell you some of the names of people who were resigned. Yoremi Villegas, Alvaro Felix from Rancho del Espinal, Jorge Espinosa, Juan Sepúlveda, Rigoberto Ramos Montoya, Juan Carlos Rentería Manjarres, Mangarito Reyes Armenta, Sergio Luis Estrada Sotelo, and also he made Ramon Rocha disappear, just like he did to Héctor Enrique Burgos Lugo. And that's not all. This was already mentioned in a previous episode, but he also resigned a young man who was mentally challenged. He was about 15 years old. His bosses sent him to fight in San Luis Rio, Colorado and Mexicali against El Russo. He went, but he only dropped off his men and then returned. Most of them were given the resignation because an employee of Chore's was leaking information about who was going, where they arrived, and which vehicles they used to Liebre, a cousin of ML, who then passed it on to El Russo. That's why they were always waiting for them. Chore didn't know why everyone he sent was getting resigned, and his bosses started demanding that he lead the offensive against El Russo. But Chore always made up excuses. If he went, it was only for 2 days before returning because something extremely important always came up. In the 2021 elections in Sinaloa, El Chore was the one who won the most. He and his people were campaigning, making sure everyone in the Dorado area and its surroundings voted for Rocha Moya. Someone told them that Faustino Hernandez, another politician from the opposing party, was giving away money to vote for the PRI. Because of that, Chore lifted Faustino's secretary and other people, and luckily for him, the secretary had 5 million pesos with him to buy votes. It was perfect timing. They say that if you are meant to make tamales, the corn husks will fall from the sky for you. And as you already know, the Chore was a big-time crook. Before that confrontation happened, what Chore's people, especially his secretary Marquitos, were doing was stealing vehicles of all types. They had a checkpoint and would snatch between 6 and 8 vehicles per trip, as they traveled in 2 vehicles and could carry about 6 to 8 passengers each. That's how they would do it. They'd steal the cars, take them to a field near El Dorado, then go back to steal another batch. They managed to steal over 120 vehicles from that spot alone. They used the excuse that they needed them for patrols, which was a lie since, as I've mentioned, they stole all types of vehicles, trucks, sports cars, luxury cars, small cars, and even machinery, just to sell them and make money. The next day, you could see that even the girlfriends of the lookouts were driving new cars, of course, the stolen cars. Chore did well out of the Culiacanazo, a real entrepreneur, that young man. Who had to go and fix that problem was Archibaldo. He told Chore in his face that he was fed up with him, and if he messed up one more time, he would be gone, that it was too much of a mess already. While drinking and already drunk, he said to his crew, "How about what Guerrito said? That when the fighting starts, I have to go up front." As if. Why doesn't he go if he's so tough? Do they think they're going to make a fool out of me? Screw them. Well, since Chore was showing off at that parade, he went to El Dorado, to a car wash in the very center, and there they were having a great time. Chore, Nini, and Vitolius. They told me they were preparing an operation to go after Nini, but he left before they could get to him. Meanwhile, Vitolius and Chore were talking about the Fanta pills they were sending, which were apparently dropping in price. For those who say YouTubers don't work in the bus, there are videos and photos of them, but unfortunately, I can't show them since I was asked not to. The day they got Nini, which was November 22nd, many celebrated. And I'm not just talking about his enemies, even his own bosses, and of course, Chore celebrated for the capture of the person who had inspired him. Here, I'll show you a photo from that very day of Nini's capture. That night, Chore was celebrating, remembering Nini, saying he got caught because he was stupid, and he brought it upon himself. Instead of being scared or worried about what had happened, the prophet was celebrating at his ranch to show that everything in this world is false. Here's the photo. And they resigned Cesar Bueno Martinez on the Culiacan Dorado highway. One of the Chapitos, making a favor for a woman, told Panu to resign Cesar Bueno, and so Panu ordered Chore to do it. They hunted him down, and when they saw him driving on the highway in an Audi, they pulled him over just like any other day. Cesar never suspected their intentions, so he pulled over without any suspicion. He was traveling with his youngest son. And so Chore got out with his crew, and standing beside the car right in front of his son, they resigned Cesar. But Chore wasn't the one who did it. It was a young boy who worked for him, known to everyone as Chonito. All right, now we'll move on to the climax of this story. During the operation to resign the Chore, they already had his location, where he slept, his phone number, and even the number of one of his workers who also was resigned on the spot. I'm talking about Juan. And, obviously, they had the vehicles the Chore used for transportation, and as you know, intelligence was gathered on that warehouse for about 3 days. And on the day of the event, a government drone was flying around all night.